All right. Lovely to see you all again. Um, I'll give a talk for just a few minutes and then we'll do a little bit of a practice. Normally, for this practice, this session, this is the third session in our series of essentially we could call it an applied neuroscience of meditation. And I was kind of reflecting as I was walking back here that normally actually what I would like to lead for this concept and this practice is really a guided meditation around sound. And everybody always loves the sound of the bell, so that's a very popular one anyways. And I think that is such a sweet and simple way, a really passive way, in a way, for us to experience a lot of mental quietude, because even the metaphor of mental quiet, we're relying on this metaphor of sound. We don't only mean sound when we say quietude. I think everybody has a sense of that. There's like, what does quietude mean in your body? Maybe we can even just stop for a moment and just like sit back and think about that. And more than think about it, maybe just feel it. What does quietude feel like in your body? So, yes, maybe there is an actual quiet of less thoughts. What does it feel like to be quiet in your body? Sometimes we use other words, like we use the word at rest, settled, or collected, or calm. These are all excellent words. All right, so we've done a little exploration. This wasn't a formal practice, but now that you've tasted that a little bit, just continuing forward with that idea of mental quietude. We can also say mental settledness or mental collectedness. And it's actually been recorded in all sorts of different traditions all over the world with different kind of ontological or religious ideas. So many different groups of people who have really had this journey or this seeking of this mental quietude, amongst other things, have all noticed some very similar factors. So there's a lot of different groups that have come to this conclusion. Most of you know that my training and ontological perspective is largely Buddhist, and so that's some of the terminology that I use and what I'm familiar with. But I've studied enough of other traditions to know that these are actually mostly cut across almost all spiritual and to some extent psychological traditions. In the case where psychological traditions have gone far enough to actually become experiential. So when we think about these stages, these predictable stages that we can go through, the first one is something like what we spend most of our time in. And from a neuroscience perspective, you might think of this as being related to the activity of what people usually call the default mode network. What is that? The default mode network. It's a network, so it means it's different parts or regions of the brain, and they communicate in with each other in such a way that our experience becomes very self-referential. We are largely thinking about the world in terms of ourself, and that's both in a very literal, physical sense. We're locating ourselves in terms of other objects in a certain way, but also in a more emotional and psychological sense. Everything that we see is in some way related to us. It's related to me. What is this? What is this for me? What is my past experience of this? Do I like it? Do I dislike it? There's a great practice some of you know, and I think many of us have done this before, but our friend from the community, Lisa, she led a meditation a few weeks ago on this concept of nothing in this room means anything. Nothing in this room means anything, which actually comes from the Course in Miracles, which is from the Christian tradition. And if you reflect on that, nothing in this room means anything. It's kind of like an antidote to this self-referential way that we normally are. Normally, we're like, everything means something because it means something to me. Over there, that's the chair that I tried to sleep on last night. Right now, I'm sitting on a couch. This is the couch that I slept on eventually after hours of not sleeping on that chair over there. I'm thinking about the sound of the AC and how I feel both that I want it and I'm a little bit worried that the sound is coming through. I know it's not coming through because now I can't hear it anymore. So everything in my experience, it relates to me in some way, and it has to do with my past experience. It has to do with what I'm projecting forward. And we spend so much of our time kind of ruminating in a cycle of thought about this. And so from a neuroscience perspective, this is the default mode network, largely. And there's more layers to it than that. There's different parts of the default mode network, but this really activates our historical perspective, our memories, and it also activates our projection of the future, which largely has to do with how we emotionally experience the world. So this is like our base state. That's not a lot of quietude. So that's like maybe how we can define what's not quietude. And then we might endeavor to have some amount of effort to settle ourselves. And it does require some effort at first. So to step out of this very compelling current, this pull that keeps us looping around and around thinking, it actually requires us to put a little bit in. It's very difficult to step out of it. Either we have to put something in, or we have to be presented with some kind of stimulus, which is overwhelming to our senses, that it kind of overrides our senses. So that's another way. And that's its own interesting topic, which I won't go into today, because that's less about us uh, managing and shepherding ourselves to a quieter place. So then this next stage, we begin to apply what in the maybe kind of Buddhist psychology we would think of as applied attention. And you can think of this as like the effort that you first make. If I think we've all tried to count our breath to 10, especially when we sit down to meditate, and it's like, at first it's so hard, and it's like I really like all these thoughts, like I'm thinking about earlier in the day, and oh my God, I can't believe I forgot to do that, and it feels hard. You can actually like if you tap in, it's like you can feel the tension of like just counting to 10. This can be so stressful, and it requires that amount of effort to some extent. We become more skillful at saying like, okay, well, it doesn't actually require that much effort. I'm actually pretty good at counting to 10 at this point. I've had enough years where I can count to 10 reliably. But it does require a little bit of effort, and you can feel that. It's not actually pleasant. If you really tap in, last week we spoke a little bit about these our sense of pleasant versus unpleasant. And if you didn't get a chance to be here for that, definitely recommend watching that. And more than watching it, actually doing the practice that we did afterwards to really tap into your sense of what feels good in your body and what doesn't feel good in your body, which intuitively we all know it's part of being human for 99.99% of us. Um, but it's really important to be able to, at will and intentionally, tap into like, oh, what does this feel like? Like right now, I can feel like I have this ongoing, long-standing tension in my left lumbar, which is like always there, especially whenever I sit cross-legged. And it feels unpleasant. And if I'm not in relationship to that, it'll start to cause some tension in my body, and I might start thinking a little bit less lucidly. Um, and I'll get more and more stressed, and my mind won't be as open, and then maybe somebody will interrupt me, and I'll snap at them and be really mean because I'm already upset. All right, I doubt that. That probably, hopefully, wouldn't happen, but okay. So we have this first stage of applied attention. In the Pali terminology of the ancient language that the Buddha spoke in, that was called vitakka. Vitakka, applied attention. And again, I'll use those words, but we can actually just say applied attention. It's just as good. And as we start to do that, you can start to get a sense also, we transition at a certain point towards sustained attention. So it's you can think of applied attention as a little bit more like staccato, like it goes in little pieces. You have to keep it keeps falling off and you have to keep putting the attention back on. And even if it's not falling off, you're kind of just actively holding your hands there to balance it because you're like, I know this is going to fall off as soon as I take my hands away. Sustained attention, which is vichara, is when you take your hands away, it actually hangs out there for a second. And you might still have a sense of like, all right, well, I'm going to keep my hands near there because I don't know, I feel like it's going to fall off at a certain point. But with this sustained attention, this smoother experience, you get more and more comfortable being like, oh yeah, that can just sit there and I can sit back and just watch it. And it might be your breathing, which is what we're going to do today in a few minutes because I don't have a meditation bell with me. So you have this applied attention, then you have this sustained attention, which is a little smoother. It requires less effort. You can relax into it a little bit more. And as you get more of that sustained attention, there's something really interesting that happens that can be difficult to pick up on. And actually, it's a very difficult transition to learn early in meditation practice, going from really having to put a lot of effort in to place your attention somewhere. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes your mind is very settled and you don't need to. But most of the time, you have to apply a lot of attention to put your mind wherever you're being asked to or wherever you want to. And we actually start to develop an idea that that is what meditation is. That it actually is this like, I'm putting my mind here and it's a practice of attention. And so this is why I'm always saying it's not a practice of attention, it's a practice of intention. Because if it's a practice of attention, it stops right there at that first stage. Like it becomes this workout all the time. And that sucks. You know, working out is not always fun. I mean, it feels good afterwards, and sometimes it's fun, but a lot of the time it's not that fun. So meditation should be something different. So this is why at that next stage, we have to actually learn like, oh, meditation is something other than me keeping my attention there. And you actually relax and you know that it's going to fall off at a certain point. And then you'll be back to like, okay, let's very carefully balance this again. But now the stakes are lower because you're like, oh, yeah, okay, sure, it fell off. Nothing broke, presumably. And and then you lean back and let it go again. At first, when you do that, your attention is like right there because you're still very concerned with whether this object is going to stay on this slippery surface, let's say. Some of you might be familiar. I'm forgetting what book this is in, but there's an old tale of like some teacher who gives a student like a spoonful of oil. Is this ringing a bell? I'm looking around for nods. And the student has to like walk without spilling the spoonful of oil. Yes, yes. So, okay, I see one nod. All right. Basically, I don't want to put you on the spot, so I'll say it and I'll probably mess it up a little bit. But the idea is the student's like, or the teacher's like, don't drop this oil, whatever you do. And then the student's like, okay, I won't drop the oil. So, they go from one place to the other and, they don't drop any oil and they're just staring at the oil the whole time. So that's like kind of a stressful experience and it's very, very one-pointed and focused. And they get there successfully. And then, the teacher asks afterwards, like, hey, did you see how beautiful it was along the way? And the student's like, no, I was just looking at this freaking oil the whole time. What do you mean? Like, what was I supposed to look around? And the teacher's like, yeah, like chill out, like enjoy the scenery a little bit. Um, and so next time the student does the similar task, and I can't remember how the story goes. They either do it and then they spill the oil everywhere, but they see all the beauties, or maybe they figure out how to not do it. The idea with us is that at first you're very focused on this oil and not spilling it. And rightly so, even in the first few minutes of meditation practice, that can be really, really important for us to settle our mind that way. Like, okay, I really need to orient to the fact that this is where I'm intentionally trying to put my mind. And then as we start to get more comfortable with that, You can feel a settling in your body. This is why in meditation we pay so much attention to our body and our breath. So they can give us very strong signals of whether we're settled enough to start to let go of that. And as we start to feel a little bit more settled, then attention naturally actually starts to open up. And this is the next thing that we actually have to learn. It's a certain kind of change that happens in our practice, in our experience of my attention is here. My eyes can be right here, but I can see the whole room. I can see there's closets over there, there's a TV over there, there's a door over there, even though my eyes haven't moved, they're right there. And so I'm having this big, wide experience, even though my attention hasn't moved. And that's much more open and relaxed. So that's this next stage where we start to open up a little bit more. We can experiment with that. And then that's a really slippery slope too, for two reasons. One, because there's all sorts of stuff going on out here. Because out here isn't just out here is also throughout our whole body. So we go from maybe paying attention to just one little part of our body or our breath. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can feel more of my body. So that can be in a way distracting because our attention will get pulled to it and then we'll want to do a new thing there rather than just being like, I'm paying attention here, but oh, interesting that there's something happening over there. So this is a really good stage where we actually have to learn how to become detached from our experience. It helps at previous stages too. I mean, each stage we become a little bit more pressed to learn how to become detached from our experience in a way, to have a healthy detachment from our experience. In this one, there's an immediacy to the requirement of becoming attached because as soon as the attention goes to somewhere, our attention becomes wider, it includes more stuff, and there's more interesting objects for our mind to start to go this way and that way too. And as it does, then we have to start over again. So, and sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's, I'm there. Okay, I can gently bring it back and still be wide open. But that's one thing. The other reason that this is actually quite a difficult transition to make is because I'm realizing as I'm talking about this, I haven't talked about the brain at all. That's okay. I've talked about the mind plenty. So the other reason this is difficult is because we're so used to gauging our success in meditation in a certain way. And that certain way is often whether the attention stays in here. And so up until now, that seemed pretty good. Like even when we're relaxed, our attention is still staying in here. So fine, we're more and more successful with less and less effort. So that kind of follows a linear track. All of a sudden, it starts feeling like you're not as good at meditation because you actually become aware of all of these other things, which could potentially be distracting. Actually, it's just a predictable stage where the mind can become more open and diffuse. And you start to lose more and more of a sense of effort, actually. And that's a big transition for us, especially in our culture. We're not so used to not putting as much effort into a task. But it's actually critical in this stage. If you're continuing to effort, you can't continue to deepen into the practice. All of these are associated with different types of brain activity to move back to that. So earlier on in the immediate stages that we were talking about, there is more of there's networks that we can talk about. So we talk about like the dorsal attention network for those who care to know. And even very likely in the early stages, the ventromedial reward pathway, which we talked about earlier in the series, which is our like kind of sense of dopamine and like doing it right or wrong, and this quick hit of like, did I do a good job? Or this quick hit of like, I opened up my social media and I got likes or something like that. So even that's involved in our meditation practice early on, and that falls away. And then it becomes this more gentle, continued, sustained awareness that might be more associated with a different network in the brain, dorsal attention network. And then even that starts to settle. And it's difficult to even call the practice a practice of attention anymore. It's almost like at a certain point, like a self-guided hypnosis or a trance of a certain nature. And things become much, much quieter at that time. And you can still become distracted, of course. And you do. Something interesting and kind of mysterious happens there in this next phase. And I don't know exactly what to say about the brain activity. I haven't studied this. There actually is a really interesting paper, and I haven't read it for a while. I'll put it in the Diabetes Sangha WhatsApp later. And actually, if you're just watching this online, it's a paper by Paul Dennison, and I believe it was published in 2019. And you can find it probably by typing his name, Dennison, NCBI 2019, or PubMed Dennison 2019. And it'll be something saying consciousness, jhana, something like this. I don't remember the exact finding of that study, but the interesting thing is what happens next as the brain starts to settle is we go from this kind of hypnotic, very open, but maybe slightly more muddy and less clear state to something that's actually extremely lucid and fairly devoid of a sense of self, and not in any kind of ontological way where it's like, oh, I'm not saying anything about whether there is a self or not a self or anything like that. But as we continue to settle into this space, there's just a more unadulterated experience of whatever we're paying attention to. And it's not so self-referential. And so we might actually be very present with what's going on in the room or what's going on in our whole body. But it's not so much a statement about me or my success or my well-being or something about my past memories or future expectations. Uh, that state is called different things in different traditions, but I really love in the Buddhist tradition, that's often called the beautiful, which feels very true. It's very lovely. And there's a metaphor of what the feeling is, which I also love because I feel very connected with this of it's like being at the bottom of a fully like placid lake. But imagine that you can breathe, maybe you have scuba gear on or something, but you're just laying there peacefully at the bottom of a totally still, crystal clear lake. So peaceful and just surrounded by experience. So that's the metaphor that was used 2,500 years ago. So, talked a big game. Now, when we do a meditation practice, you're going to be like, God, I didn't feel any of that stuff. What is this? But the interesting thing is, there's some traditions that say, like, oh, well, here are all the requirements. You're either here or you're not here, and that, there's a lot of traditions that actually are like that. But I think more and more people are coming to accept that everything is kind of on a continuum, it's on a spectrum. And so you can start to have a little bit of a sense of, uh, oh yeah, like I do feel like my attention is a little more diffuse and open, or oh yeah, I can experience that paying attention to my breath, but it's not just in this one little way, or I'm not having to put so much effort in. It's a little more open. Or yeah, I'm noticing more of my body in the room without feeling like my mind and eyes, perhaps behind my eyelids, are going every which way. Okay, wow, it's already 8:30. Let's practice. All right. So, assuming that you're already in a comfortable position to practice for a few minutes, You might take a few deep breaths, even shake your body out a little bit. Imagine that you can just use your breath and a little bit of moving your body around to shake out any nonsense that you just heard or any nonsense that you think about it. You don't need to do any thinking about this stuff right now. As you feel ready, you can become more physically still, settled, and just tune into your ears for a moment. What are they hearing? Let the sound come your way. Starting at the top of your head, start by just imagining that you've got a big chunk of butter that just dropped on your head. And the butter has all of these beautiful medicinal qualities that soothe your body and they also soothe your mind. And if you don't like butter, you can imagine it's coconut oil. Melts pretty easily too. So just imagine feeling it sit there for a moment. And imagine that it's starting to melt just a little bit. And as it melts, it moves over your scalp. And you can even imagine that it melts even into your skull. And everything that it touches becomes a little more settled, becomes a little heavier, becomes a little quieter. So you can imagine this process happening inside your head, between your ears, behind your eyes, even in your mouth and moving down your esophagus and outside. Imagining your cheeks get heavy, your jaw heavy, whole face heavy. Not just heavy, but healed in a way. I invite you to just follow this imagination downward through your torso, arms, brushing. Plenty of time. Moving through your rib cage, and also the outside, your back, your chest. Just soften, just heavy. Same thing with your belly, inside and outside. Moving through your pelvis, in your upper legs, your lower legs, and your feet. Notice what it's like to breathe into this more pleasant, settled body. You specifically to follow your breath, imagining that it's moving from your nose through your head and throat down to your chest to about your rib cage, and then moving back up from the bottom of your rib cage or from your heart up, back, out the nose. So imagining this flow or pathway of breath between the nose and either the heart or the lower ribs, whatever feels better, and then back out through the nose. You can let this length of breath be just a little bit longer than the normal. Just a tiny bit longer. To this, we'll attach some numbers. On the inhale, counting to 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And on the exhale, counting back to 1. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. So still following this pathway, but making a point to count these numbers over the course of the breath. The numbers are the primary focus. And see if you can take some satisfaction and even apply a little bit of intensity into each number. Notice what kind of inner voice you're using with these numbers. Notice also the tension that's inherent in trying to hold on to those numbers. And keep following those numbers up and down with the breath. So you're both following and counting. And when you feel ready, there's no rush, but also don't be too hesitant. Can let go of that count, even if you don't feel like you did a good job of it. See what it's like to just release the numbers. Just keep following that same breath, but no numbers. Just breathing down to the chest, back out of the nose. Let go of any tension associated with those numbers. See if you can trust your mind a little bit more to just let your breath be there in the center, even when all this other stuff is going on. Inevitably, you're going to slip off. See how low stakes that is. Trust the feeling and notice that it feels good when your mind can stay on that track, moving forward and back. Or there can be a trust that your breath will keep being there, even if you forget it's there. You can feel and relate to the part of your mind that's always there with your breath, even when some other more pressing part of your mind is not there with your breath. As you exhale, follow your attention all the way out of your nose. See if you can just hold your attention right there in front of your nose, right in that first place, or just before that first place that you start to feel breath in front of you. And imagine just breathing through that space back and forth, almost like a tiny little space right in front of you, or right under or in front of your nose. There's no right or wrong way to do this, whatever feels connected. Your breath pass over and through, back and forth, this space right in front of your nose. In this passing over and through, see what you can let go of. See what you can do less of. If your breath becomes quiet and subtle, that's just fine. See if you can do this even more pleasantly, even more relaxedly. See if you can take your mind and step back into the experience that's already waiting for you. So it opens up as you step back, settle down, do less. See if you can enjoy anything about your present experience, anything at all. Perhaps letting go of even in your sense of needing to pay attention to the breath. Letting your experience shape itself, but letting your breath be everywhere in your experience. Final few moments of the practice, I'll read a passage of somebody from thousands of years ago who was likely experiencing something very similar. This and that can be like images in a mirror and the moon and water blended together with nothing left out. First, do not feed your own mental identity. then others will not impose their own conditions on you. Each form also has no form. Only in this wholeness are things not isolated. Even then, you must take the backward step and return home to be with this in your meditation until you are satisfied. Then all clouds vanish into a single color. The snow covers 1,000 mountains. Your deep vision brings the opening to view the whole body of the world. As you feel satisfied, you can start to draw your practice to a close. Perhaps starting by taking stock of how you're feeling right now. And then perhaps considering why you came to practice, what you want out of spending some time here today, and what you want for others in your life as well. And as you feel satisfied with that, you can take in some deeper breaths. And begin to make some small movements. And you can come on back.